There is a photograph from 1917 of a British soldier strapped into a chair. His mouth is being held open with a metal instrument. A wire runs from a machine into his throat. The men in that room were not torturing him. They were healing him. That was the word they used in the official case notes. Healing. 90 miles away, in a quiet garden at another hospital, a different doctor was sitting with a different soldier, just talking, asking him gently to describe his dreams. Same war. Same injury. Same army. Two completely different rooms. And a few hundred miles from both of them, in a French farmyard at dawn, 6 more soldiers were being handed rifles and told to aim at a 17-year-old boy. 3 rooms. 1 war. And the thing that decided which room you ended up in was never how badly your mind had broken. It was who happened to be standing over you when it did. By late 1914, doctors on the Western Front were already describing something medicine had never documented at this scale before. Men with no wound anywhere on their bodies who could not walk, could not speak, could not stop shaking. By the end of the war, the official count was over 80,000 cases. Historians believe the real number was far higher. In 1915, a psychologist named Charles Myers gave the condition a name in a letter to a medical journal. Shell shock. He never fully believed the name fit what he was seeing. Some of these men hadn't even been near an explosion, but the phrase stuck because it handed the army something it badly wanted, an explanation that sounded physical. A shell had done this. Not fear. Not the war itself. And that single assumption decided which of the 3 rooms a broken man was sent to. At Craiglockhart War Hospital in Scotland, a physician named W.H.R. Rivers treated shell-shocked officers by simply talking to them, for hours, walking them back through the worst thing they had ever seen, until it stopped controlling them. Rivers is remembered today as one of the only people in this entire war who treated broken men like human beings, but that gentleness was reserved for officers. Enlisted men rarely got a room like that one. Across London, at Queen Square Hospital, a different doctor named Yealland was solving the identical problem with a different instrument. His specialty was soldiers who had lost the ability to speak. His own case files describe the method: mouth held open with a metal tongue depressor, a live electrical current applied to the back of his throat, sometimes for hours at a time. He never once followed up to find out what happened to any of these men afterward. This is what the British Army considered a cure. And for the men judged criminal instead of sick, it got exponentially worse. In the summer of 1916, an order went out to every officer above the rank of captain. Cowardice was to be punished by death, and a medical excuse was not to be accepted as a defense. Not sometimes. Not case by case. A direct order that a man's own medical file could not save him in court. Thomas Highgate was the first man executed under this system, just 35 days into the war. At the Battle of Mons he watched most of his battalion die around him, and he ran and hid in a barn. Every officer who might have spoken for him was dead or missing. He had no one to represent him at his own trial. He was 17 years old. Abe Bavistine was 16 when he was convicted of desertion for sheltering from the cold in an abandoned farmhouse. And then there was Harry Farr. Farr had already survived 2 years at the Somme. He had been hospitalized for 5 months with uncontrollable shaking and a stammer that would not stop, a textbook case of exactly what Charles Myers had named the year before. It was written in his medical file. His officers had access to that file. When he refused to return to the front line, they court-martialed him anyway and shot him. This is where the Army's own paperwork gives up its most disturbing detail. The firing squads were not strangers. They were the man's own unit, friends who had shared cigarettes with him the week before. To make the act survivable, one rifle was sometimes loaded with a blank round, so afterward every man could privately believe his own shot hadn't been the fatal one. Soldiers who lived through it said the trick never worked. You could feel the difference in the recoil. Every man knew, with total certainty, whether he had just killed his own friend. And if the volley didn't finish the job, an officer had to walk forward and fire one final shot into the man's skull, at point-blank range. Some of those officers never spoke about it again, for the rest of their lives. 306 British and Commonwealth soldiers died this way. Not at the hands of the enemy. At the hands of their own army, for the crime of having a nervous system that reached its limit. And then the war made absolutely certain nobody would hear about it. Families were not told their sons had been executed. The official phrase used again and again was that the man had died a soldier's death. The writer Robert Graves, an infantry officer at the time, opened the Army's own backfiles and found roughly 20 reports of executions. Days later, he watched a government minister tell Parliament that no such executions had happened at all. The full military records stayed sealed for 75 years, not released to the public until 1990. The man who finally broke that silence had his own reason for caring. His name was John Hipkin, and in 1941, as a 14-year-old cabin boy in the Second World War, his ship was sunk and he became one of Britain's youngest prisoners of war. Inside a German prison camp, Hipkin watched a guard shoot a teenage prisoner dead over an argument about a bowl of soup. Decades later, as a retired schoolteacher, he read about a 17-year-old British private who had been tied to a stake and shot by his own side for leaving his post to comfort a grieving friend. He recognized the shape of it immediately, a boy killed by the side that was supposed to protect him. He spent the rest of his life fighting for those 306 names, until, in August 2006, every one of them received a full posthumous pardon, not because every case could be proven, but because the government finally admitted, in writing, that the system built to judge these men had failed them by design. 90 years too late for Harry Farr to hear it, so here is what almost nobody tells you about this war. It ran 3 rooms at once. A room that healed you with electricity and called it kindness. A room that healed you with conversation, if you were the right rank to deserve it. And a room with 6 rifles in it, for anyone who ran out of anywhere else to go. Which room caught you was never really a measure of your courage. It was a measure of your luck, your rank, and which officer happened to be standing over you the moment you finally broke. We still sort people into rooms like that today. We just don't call them that anymore. The only real difference is that, most of the time, nobody's standing there with a rifle. Most of the time.